The movie begins in Florida in the year 1980. A girl is shown walking in some settlement near the woods. She comes by a lake and sees a lady sitting there and singing. The girl approaches her and the lady shows her the hat she is wearing. She then tells the girl to reach inside her hat because it is magical. The little girl does, and she takes out a purple flower. Then she sees several mysterious people appear in the woods, all lined up and looking in their direction. They then start walking towards them, and they, along with the magician lady, take the little girl against her will. The scene changes to show a big building in the snow. The Overlook Hotel. The point of view follows around a little boy, Danny, as he rides his small tricycle through the hallways of the hotel. He then stops and looks at a room with the number 237 on it. An old and grotesque lady then peeks out through the darkness of that room. After that, Danny wakes up from that nightmare in his bed. He walks at night to the restroom, but when he gets there, he gets scared and runs out. His mother comes behind him and comforts him. Back in his room, she continues to comfort him, but he has his thumb in his mouth and will not speak. The scene changes to Danny and Rick Halloran sitting on a bench outside. Rick speaks to him, and even does so telepathically, a phenomenon called shining. Danny tells him that he will no longer use shining himself because it is dangerous, and Rick tells him that no one shine like Danny. He then tells him a story about how his grandfather had a darkness in him, like Danny's father. Then Rick gives Danny a special box. He tells him that one day he will build one just like it for himself. Danny then gets up from the bench and hears his mother calling his name. We see that Rick has disappeared. He is not a real person. Danny's mother comes to him, looking scared, while she hugs him. A poster is shown hanging nearby of a missing child. It is the little girl, Violet, from the start of the film. The next scene shows Danny watching TV with his mom. He gets up and goes to the restroom. When he enters, the old and grotesque lady from room 237 is shown standing in the bathtub. But Danny closes the door while being inside, unafraid this time. We then hear a loud yell take place, and then Danny comes out and joins his mother on the couch. After that scene, a man wakes up in bed. He sees a naked female lying next to him, and then he goes to the toilet and vomits into it. While he does that, the year 2011 is shown, and so is the state of New Jersey. He has a memory of what happened the night before. He remembers himself fighting in a bar. After that memory, he checks his wallet and discovers that his money has been stolen, most likely by the female he woke up next to. Then he checks her purse and steals her money. When he does that, however, a little toddler comes out of his room, crying. Rick Halloran appears and tells him to put the money back. It is revealed that this man is Danny all grown up. The next scene shows New York. A young lady sits in a movie theater and watches a movie. An older man comes and sits next to her, several seats in the back. The lady in the magician's hat, Rose, sits with some male. They both watch the young lady with the older guy, and not the movie. They watch as the lady puts him to sleep with just some words. She then takes his wallet and carves something into his face. Afterwards, she puts a spell on him, saying that every time he sees that carving of his, he will say that he likes little girls. She leaves the theater after that, and that guy with Rose comes after her. She tells him to get away from her, but then Rose arrives and takes the girl by her arm. She is very interested in her. The following scene has Danny waking up outside with some bottles next to him. He seems lost and confused as to his whereabouts. Then the state changes to New Hampshire. Over 12 people are seated to witness a magician on stage. A little girl in the audience says several times to the magician how she is not impressed by the tricks. After that party, 2 people enter their house and see a bunch of spoons lying on the kitchen floor. But the alarming part is that perhaps a similar amount of spoons are seen hanging to the ceiling by way of nothing other than magic. A little girl then comes behind them, supposedly her parents, and says abracadabra. When she does, all the spoons fall from the ceiling and startle her parents. Rose is shown to enter her house. On her bed, there is that young lady she took from the theater. When she starts speaking to her, the girl tells Rose that she is crazy and that she kidnapped her. Due to that, Rose tells her that from now on the girl will speak the truth. And once that was said to her, she quickly says that Rose is the most beautiful woman. Rose seems to have the power to make people speak truthfully. She then makes the girl an offer. She offers her an extremely long life if the girl joins them. The scene changes to Danny getting off a bus. He has arrived in New Hampshire. He walks and comes across a bunch of little buildings that represent that part of town. While there, he meets a man near a train. He offers him a place where he can live. Danny and he then arrive at a house where a lady explains to him some of the rules. This is where he will be staying. Later, at night, we see Rose with the young lady, Andy, lying at a beach. The other people from earlier that were with her are now there as well. They call themselves the Chosen, and then begin to chant. When they finish, Rose takes out some tube and says that Violet is in there. She opens the tube and a gaseous substance leaks out of it. Rose breathes it in and then breathes it into Andy. This then causes Andy to scream in agony, and her pupils even turn white. The scene then turns over to show Danny waking up in a bed. There are arms holding him from behind. He turns around and sees something of a zombie female there. She speaks to him, and then we see a zombie baby lying next to her. Danny gets terrified and moves back with his back to the wall, and then they disappear. Danny then knocks on the door of his new friend Billy. He says he needs help, and Billy invites him in. The next scene shows a support group meeting at the house. The one who speaks is Dr. John Dalton. Danny speaks to him after the meeting. and mentions how he lost his watch in a specific place. John is kind of taken aback by this information, but the next scene shows him and Danny sitting in John's office, and John asks him how he knew about what he said. Danny says that it was a kind of intuition. Andy is then seen at the beach, along with her. The rest of the chosen ones are there too. Rose comes to her, and Andy asks her if she is still human. Rose asks her if she really even cares. After that, we are shown Danny mopping the floor. He sees a cat enter a room, and he goes after it. He then sees it lying at the foot of a bed where an old man lies. The old man calls Danny a doctor, but Danny denies that he is one. Then the old man says that he will die. He expresses his fear of death to Danny, saying how he does not know what to expect from it. At that point, Danny uses the shining on him. He communicates to him telepathically and says how he is just going to sleep, that there is nothing to fear. The old man calls him Dr. Sleep for comforting him. Afterwards, he claims to see his wife. And finally, a gaseous substance leaves his mouth that Danny is able to see, quite possibly his life essence. Then Danny goes back to his room. As he takes his shoes off, he sees something written on the blackboard. There is the word hello written in chalk, but he has no idea who could have written it. This prompts him to stand up and write the word hi. The little girl from earlier is then shown smiling in her bed. 8 years are then shown to go by. Danny is still living in that house, and is currently standing and talking in front of the support group. He speaks about his father, Jack. Then back at his room, he sees the word morning written on the blackboard. After 8 years, he is still receiving such messages. He then writes the word school. Later, the state of Iowa is shown. A baseball game is happening with children. One man on the bleachers is talking about how good a particular boy is, the one that is batting. Next to him sits one of Rose's colleagues, Crow Daddy, listening to the man. The game is over, and the boy is walking home alone. A van then pulls up, and a man in the passenger seat tells the boy that he is ready to move up in his game. Then he asks him if he wants to get in the van. The boy refuses, but then the door slides open and Andy is there to ask him the same. And then he gets in with them. Night has arrived, and the wrongdoers arrive back at their camp. They take out the boy from the van, who struggles as they bring him down to the dirt. They all encircle him, and he begs for them to leave him alone. But Rose then says that fear makes the steam better. It is what they call the substance on which they feed. Rose then puts him to eternal sleep, and they all start feeding on the boy's steam. While this happens, the little girl, Abra, feels very uneasy in her sleep. She then wakes up and starts to say stop. She used the powers of her shining to say it, and in doing so, even Rose feels her power from such a long distance. Afterward, Abra starts screaming uncontrollably, and her parents rush in to comfort her. Danny is shown to get knocked off from his bed. He looks in the mirror and sees Redrum in it. He then turns around and sees the word murder. He gets up and goes to write on the blackboard. He simply writes who, and after waiting for several seconds, he gets the written message baseball boy. The people with the powers then finish with the boy and start putting his spare steam into a tube. Meanwhile, Abra cries, and her parents attempt to further comfort her. Rose then speaks of the child with the shining to Crow Daddy. She says that it is a very powerful child that she felt, and Crow is stupefied that she felt it from about 1,500 miles away. Rose then says that she could be even further away than that. He asks if it is a boy or a girl, and Rose says that very likely a girl. She further adds that she did not feel a power like hers in a very long time. Back in Abra's home, Abra comes into the kitchen while her mother is there, and says that she made a new friend, Dan. In school, she is shown to hear the thoughts of the other children. One girl looks her way and thinks the word freak about Abra, causing her to hide behind her computer. Then in her room again, she looks at the picture of the baseball boy that she printed at her school. She concentrates on it and receives images of what happened to him. She keeps doing it to see more, and then she lies in her bed and becomes possessed by the images. She is able to see the specific place that Rose and her crew went to, and what they all look like. Abra writes down the location in her possessed form. Afterward, she gets out of bed and comes to her window. She puts her hands on it and starts floating. After holding on for a while, she then falls, but not onto the floor, but into a grocery store. In that store, Rose is shopping. She then comes to a refrigerated section and sees Abra through the glass. She is very delighted to see her, and she seemingly knows that it is the special child. Rose tries to grab her, but with strong power, she gets pushed away by the girl. She then gets pushed further into the store. Back at the house, Danny stays in. Danny gets picked up from the floor by his friend Billy. He tells him that while he was on the floor, he kept saying the name Tony. The following scene has Rose returning to her crew. She tells Crow that the girl found her. She tracked them down using her power. Later, Abra is getting dropped off by her mother, but instead of going to school, Abra goes to see Danny, whom she knew how to find. She comes up to him, and they go to sit at a bench. She starts using the shining with him, but he says that they should not engage in it. She then says if they go to Iowa, she could get the boy's baseball glove, and if she does, it would help her further to track those who had put the boy to eternal sleep. But Danny's response is that he wants her to go home. He says that those people are dangerous. Back at the support house, a cat goes into a room again and Danny sees it. He says to the cat that it made a mistake this time. The room is empty. Then Danny walks in there and he spots someone. The person is Rick Halloran. Rick tells him that those dangerous people noticed Abra. He tells him that they might put her to eternal sleep. Later, Rick also tells Danny that he still owes a debt, and that Danny should pay it. The scene shifts to Rose. She gets on top of the roof at her place and begins to meditate. She is shown to fly above the earth, engaged in some sort of sophisticated search method. After she is done flying, she lands on some street. She then turns her attention to a specific house and flies into it through a window. She stands inside Abra's room. She sees Abra and tells her to keep sleeping. Afterwards, Rose sees a wall of filing drawers. They are representations of the mental files that Abra keeps. Rose then goes searching inside of them. But Abra stands up from her bed and slams the drawer into Rose's hand. Abra looks different, with blue hair and non-existent eyes. She then starts walking towards Rose, who for the first time looks very scared. And then Abra starts looking into Rose's mental files. Rose screams and panics, and eventually takes her hand out of the drawer that jammed it. But after that, Abra tosses her out of her window and sends her flying hundreds of miles back to where she came from. Rose lands on the roof, and then from there, she is humiliated further by falling onto the dirt. Crow and Andy come to her aid. She tells them that the girl got into her head. We then see Abra telling Danny how she got into Rose's head. Danny does not seem too fond of this. However, back at the camp, one of Rose's members says that the oldest of them is dying, Grandpa Fleck. Rose tells him that he cannot die, that he witnessed how empires rise and fall, that he oozes fear, but it seems like fear ate him this time. And so he dies. When he does, his body disappears, and what is left of him is steam. The rest of them rush in to devour it. Danny is shown to come to Billy's room again. He asks Billy if he trusts him. He then tells him that he has to tell him something and that he should do his best to believe him. They then are shown riding in a car together. Abra is there with Danny by way of The Shining. She sits, perhaps metaphorically, in the backseat. She then starts telling him about how she got into Rose's head, and then told him how she did it. And in doing so, she accidentally got into Danny's head. While she was in there, she saw some things and then asked him about them. Danny tells her that it is from his past, from the Overlook Hotel. At Rose's camp, Crow tells Rose that they are ready to go find Abra, but he tells her not to come. He says that the girl got into her head, so she might use that against her. Then Danny and Billy arrive at the place that Abra wrote down on paper. Abra leads them through with her shining. When they get there, they start digging. Danny tells Abra that she better leave now, that her phantom presence is unnecessary while they dig. Eventually, they dig to the point where they unearth the baseball boy. Then once they picked up what they needed, they drive all the way to Abra's house. When they get there, her dad comes out and gets aggressive with Danny. He takes him and is about to punch him, but then Abra appears and interferes. She uses her power to stop him. Afterwards, they are all in Abra's house. Her father asks if the evil people with powers know about her daughter. Danny confirms that they do, and then he takes out the baseball glove and gives it to Abra. She touches it and uses the shining. Once she does, she emerges in ghost form inside the van of Rose's crew. She sees them riding in it, and then tells Danny where they might be. Abra also says that she did not see Rose there. They all then go to Abra's room, and Danny tells her that Rose's people will track her, and that she should let them do it. But he tells her that she should do a trick. The next scene shows them driving to the woods. They then get there, and shortly after, so does Rose's crew. They all come out of their trailer and see Abra sitting there on a table. Andy comes to her and puts a needle in her. Rose's crew gets irritated, and then they start getting shot at by Danny and Billy from behind the trees. Rose tells them to leave telepathically, as she is not there with them. Some of the crew die, and Andy gets shot in the arm. Danny and Billy then head for the trailer. Danny sees Andy through the window, and is about to fire at her, but has to reload his gun. She then comes out and tells him to stop. She tells him that he is sleepy, and he starts to become what she says. She then tells him to sleep and takes his gun away. Danny struggles to fight her words while she points his gun at him and gets ready to eliminate him. But then she gets shot in the neck. Billy appears and shoots her again. She lies on the ground, dying, and tells Billy to put himself to eternal sleep. Danny yells for him not to do it, but Billy cannot resist the power of Andy's words, and so he shoots himself in the head, and then Andy dies as well. Abra appears and tells Danny that Crow is not there. He is then shown to take her to her house, where she actually sits. He puts her in his car and they ride together. There he tells her that he used a lot of his drugs on her, and that she should not even try to shine. Danny then arrives at Abra's home and sees that her father is dead, with a knife in his chest. He then goes to his room at the support house and tries speaking with Abra using the shining, but it does not work, and then he asks Tony for help. He tries drinking, but then throws the bottle down in frustration, and so he turns to concentrate. The room then tilts, and he slides into the blackboard. After that, Danny appears in the car with Abra and Crow. He tells her that he has a plan and they touch with their palms. Abra then gets out of her lying position and sits up. She starts speaking with Crow, but it is revealed that Danny sits inside her, doing the talking. Crow asks who he is speaking to, and Danny, through Abra, tells him that he's the guy who eliminated his friends. He tells him that he is about to perform a trick, and then uses his shining to turn the car and slam it into a tree. Crow flies out of the front window by a good distance. Abra comes out and sees him dying on the ground. Danny, through her, then tells him that he hopes Crow is in a lot of pain, and then he finally dies. Afterwards, Abra walks on the road and sees Rose standing there in ghost form. She asks her what she has done, and Abra just walks through her. Rose returns to her physical form and starts taking out a couple of tubes of steam. She inhales them and gets more power. Danny then meets up with Abra. They get into a car and start driving away. Danny tells her that they are going to Colorado. He wants to go to a place that is dangerous for people like him and her. And then he says that if that is the case for them, then it should also be the case for people like Rose. While they ride, Abra's mom calls her from her house, but Abra just tells her that she loves her, and then hangs up and throws the phone out the window. The next scene has them parked next to the Overlook Hotel. Danny tells Abra that she should stay in the car, that he has a plan. Then he enters the hotel and it lights up. We see Danny walk in many places as he reminds himself of the place. Eventually, he enters the room where he originally wrote Redrum. He peeks through the hole in the door and gets a vision of his mother screaming while the axe broke through it. Danny then walks a hallway and enters the ballroom. He sits at the bar and gets greeted by Lloyd the bartender. He pours him some alcohol in a glass, and then Danny starts saying that the bartender is not Lloyd, but instead his father. The bartender denies it. Danny then speaks about his mom dying, and asks if the bartender cares about any of this. He is stupefied that he does not, and says that she was his wife. But the bartender continues to deny it. He then says to Danny that the mind is like a blackboard, and the drink is the eraser, and then he asks him if he will drink it. Danny refuses to, and the bartender hits the glass with force, shattering it. He then disappears after that. Abra then shines to him and says that Rose has arrived. Danny goes to Abra, and they both enter the Overlook. Once inside, Abra tells him that this place is sick. After some minutes, Rose enters the place as well. She walks near the elevators and sees an enormous amount of blood gushing through to the floor, but it does not seem to bother her. She then enters the typing room and sees Abra and Danny standing on the stairs. Danny is wielding an axe. He tells her that she does not know where she is, and then they both use their shining on her. In doing so, they place her in the gigantic maze. She is astounded by such a move, and then sees someone running. She goes after the person. When she finds them, it turns out to be Abra. Abra then tells Rose that she will die here. Rose does not feel threatened by her words, however, and then a duplicate of Abra runs from behind and slices her leg. Then she does it again. After doing it a third time, Abra tells her that pain purifies steam. But when she tries again, Rose grabs her this time and holds her up by the neck. Then she realizes that it is not the real Abra she is dealing with. Danny uses his shining to capture her in a huge coffin while Rose holds Abra. But Rose then yells that she had enough, and a shockwave destroys the whole situation. After that, she appears in the typing room again, while Abra runs away. Rose tells Danny that she should have met him years ago. She slowly starts walking toward him, and eventually, he starts getting backed by her as they both go up the stairs. Danny then strikes her with his axe and it slightly lands on her shoulder, due to her taking most of the force away. She then takes the axe away from him and throws him down the stairs with her magnificent power. Rose comes to him and hurts him some more. She feels his power as she is holding him down and says how good it is. Many images come to her of the evil powers that lurk in the hotel, and then Danny says that he is not alone there in his mind. He unleashes the monsters of the Overlook out of his mind and at Rose. They attack her, and as powerful as she is, she cannot fight all of them. So they end her life and then devour her steam. But unleashing them came with a price. They then went after Danny. Abra runs in the hallway, where she then encounters the twin ghost little girls. From the other end of the hallway, Danny appears with an axe. She runs and then hides in room 237. Standing in the main room, Abra turns to her right and sees the old grotesque lady coming out of the bathtub a good distance away. Danny then comes in, and Abra tells him that it is not him she is speaking to, but instead the hotel. Danny then swings his axe at her, but is prevented from actually hitting her. She pushes away the axe with her shining, and then Danny returns to his body. Afterwards, he tells Abra to run because he is unstable. We then see him make it to the boiler room. He watches it burn. While it burns, the ghost of his mother appears to comfort him. Danny stands there in his child form, perhaps letting go of the Overlook as it entered back then. Meanwhile, Abra stands outside of the hotel, watching it burn. The scene completely changes to showing Abra in her room. She is speaking to someone. It is Danny in ghost form. He tells her that there could be more like the powers of the Overlook Hotel out there in the world, and even possibly worse. And then he tells her that he was wrong for telling her to hide her shining. He tells her to shine on, and then her mother comes in. She asks Abra who she was speaking to, and Abra says no one. Then she comes out of her room and says that she was speaking to Danny. Her mother stands there and absorbs her words. Then Abra says that her father is okay, and her mother accepts her words. Abra then looks in her restroom and sees the old grotesque lady there that she took home unwillingly from the Overlook. She goes into the restroom along with her, and possibly did exactly what Danny did almost 40 years ago, locking her in a coffin.